Living fully alive in every way. You're listening to Relationship Prescriptions with Dr. Carol.
Hello again, it's Dr. Carol, and welcome to Relationship Prescriptions. Let me ask you something. How often do you go to, say, Starbucks for a cup of coffee? Maybe every day on your way to work or a couple times a week. It's very likely you are spending $20, $30, $40, perhaps $40 every month, maybe $75 a month just on coffee. What if you could change the life of a child living in poverty for just a cup of coffee a couple days a week? For the price of a cup of coffee twice a week, you can change the life of a child living in poverty. Now, perhaps you're like me. Perhaps you have seen those pictures, maybe on television, maybe at your church, maybe you've been to a concert, and Compassion International has talked about the children in need and how you can make a difference in the life of a child. And not just any child, one specific child with a name and a picture and a family and a community and a church and a country that you can know, that you can get to know. And you can make a very personal difference in the life of that very specific, unique, precious, beautiful child. Well, I just came back from a marvelous experience at the Catalyst Leadership Conference in Atlanta, Georgia. And while I was there, I found out a level of information about Compassion International that I had only been peripherally aware about before. And here's a conversation I had with David Trevette, one of the church liaison sponsors with Compassion International, about some of the work that they do. And stay tuned. After this little conversation, I'm going to come back and share with you some action that I took as a result of this. Here's my conversation with David Trevette. This is Dr. Carol, and welcome once again to Relationship Prescriptions. I am here in Atlanta, Georgia today, here at the Catalyst Atlanta 2018, and it has been an awesome experience. One of the very important sponsors here at Catalyst is Compassion International, and I am here with David Trevette, who is the Church Relations Manager, i.e. Child Advocate for the Southeastern region. Welcome, David, to the program.
Thank you, Dr. Carol. It's good to be here.
I have been so impressed by the things that I have heard about Compassion International. Let me just start by asking you how you got involved with this organization.
Yeah, thank you. Well, actually, I was serving in leadership with a church in Lakeland, Florida.
Okay.
And a Compassion representative came and was telling me a little bit about the ministry. And to be honest with you, I've heard of Compassion before, but I associate it mostly with artists.
Okay,
and then
right.
I knew there was a sponsorship piece to that, but I didn't realize how they work with the local church. And so I was invited on a vision trip. And so both my wife and I flew to Uganda and Kenya, and we're able to see firsthand how Compassion works with local churches in the East Africa area. And we have a significant piece of our hearts, both my wife and I are in East Africa because our son, who we adopted, is from East Africa.
Oh, wow.
And so for us to be able to go to East Africa and see Compassion working through the local church, I was blown away at how ministry is done there.
Your adopted son, did you meet your son through Compassion or?
I did not. We actually had adopted Ben 2 years prior before going with Compassion. But interesting enough, we did sponsor a boy named David from Uganda before we left on that vision trip. And we actually got to meet David when we were in Uganda. And the location that we met him in the city of Kampala was the same location that we also had our son, Ben, and visited and had dinner there. So it was kind of this surreal experience to have, my son and our sponsored son, our child, in the same place.
What a God moment.
Amazing. It was, It was a very neat time.
Well, from your experience, either on that trip or now working in church relations with the organization, just give our listeners who may not be aware of all the things Compassion International does, what kind of a difference the organization can make and is making for children.
Well, coming from someone who served in leadership at a larger church, many times I would actually get frustrated with nonprofit organizations at times because I'm working with a limited budget, trying my best to mobilize our people toward being on mission, going on mission trips. And many times these organizations were much larger than the local church.
Yes.
But then they would still continue to ask for funds. And unfortunately, many times when that happens, the nonprofit overshadows the local church. And what I found with Compassion on my first vision trip, and even today when I see Compassion work with the local church, they do their best not to overshadow the local church, but to come alongside of the local church and partner with them, both here domestically, as far as providing tools to help churches mobilize their people, but obviously internationally too. So we have about 7,000 partnerships, church partners around the world. We work in 25 different countries. And of course, the most important thing, we're child advocacy. We focus on children.
Yes.
And we actually call it the 3 C's. It's our vision, releasing children from poverty in Jesus' name. And then we keep these 3 C's in front of us to always remind us of that vision and to kind of keep us focused. And the first C is that Christ-centered.
Yes.
So everything that we do is centered around Christ. And even with the mission statement, we'll never take the "in Jesus' name" out of it in our mission statement. The second one is that we're church-based. Again, everything goes through the local church because we want the local church to be a hero.
Yes.
And then the third, it's all about the children, right? Because we believe that children can be transformed, right? They can get the education, they can get the uniforms to actually go to school, they can get the immunizations, the health care. They can get the Bible studies. They can learn a trade. All those things, they can be released from poverty. They can break that cycle of poverty, but going through the local church to do it. So those are the 3 C's that we focus on, that we try to keep that in front of us at all times, a reminder of why
you exist.
Why we exist, yeah, absolutely.
That seems so in line with what Jesus talked about in Matthew 25. If you serve the least of these.
That's exactly right.
These children, so in need that their lives can be changed. I am impressed also by the amount of difference in a child's life that a relatively small dollar amount, or what seems like a small dollar amount for us in this country, can make. Talk about what that involves, both financially and then connection-wise, for an individual or a couple or a family in this country to connect with a child through Compassion.
Yeah, so part of that is a one-on-one relationship, because we feel like it's extremely important to have someone sponsoring a child and there's actual interaction to make it as personal as possible. And so we encourage people those who sponsor, to write their child, encourage that child, tell that child that they're praying for them, actually pray for that child, which is great. But I love the stories that come from the field, that the children are praying for their sponsor family, or they're praying for that individual. And really the long-term goal of that, yes, the child is receiving long-term holistic discipleship through the gifts of that sponsor, but the sponsor is also being encouraged through that child, and that child sharing their testimonies with that sponsor, which is a win, right?
Yes.
And from someone in church leadership, that's really your goal. You want to mobilize people, but you also want people to understand what extreme poverty is, because the majority of people will never set foot in a extreme impoverished area.
Right.
A small percentage will, but not a large percentage. So how do you provide tools to help someone with that? And one story, I just got back from El Salvador, and hearing this little boy's testimony as he shared with what extreme poverty looks like, and how does it feel, and things that maybe we would never even think about. And one thing he shared that hit home to me was when he would return to his shack with his mom, if the room was warm, he knew he was going to be fed. He knew he was going to have dinner that night. But if his room was not warm, then he would have to wait maybe to the next day to get food. And so that's something that I would have never thought of, or my kids would never think of. A warm room equals food, because the oven or the stove was working or it was being used, and so that's really the goal, is to as a child shares that story with someone who's sponsoring them, that they realize, okay, we're talking about extreme poverty. Here's an opportunity to be able to release this child from that extreme poverty, again, in Jesus' name.
How much is a sponsorship?
$38 a month is the sponsorship.
That's just a little over $1 a day.
It is, and honestly, I love coffee. I mean, I'll admit, I have to have my coffee. I
had my coffee just before we talked right now.
I have to have my coffee. But basically, if you add up my coffee bill, you're talking about $38. I mean, after a week, honestly, basically $38 a month. And $38 a month, again, goes to the holistic approach of discipleship for that child. And that's...
So for $38 a month, you get connected with a specific child. You know their name, you know where they live, you get their picture.
That's right.
And you have the opportunity to write letters back and forth.
Absolutely. And what's neat about it, depending on the sponsor, they can choose the child based upon birth date, location. A lot of young families, they'll choose to sponsor children that are the same age of their children.
Yes.
And that way you can bridge the two together. And I do that with our 3 children. We sponsor 2 children, a girl from Ethiopia and a boy from David from Uganda.
Yes.
Same age of our 2 children, 2 of our 3 children. And what's nice about that is they all communicate with each other. And yes, you can still write, but we also have an app now that you can actually text. Turn it and take a picture of yourself.
How
and hit
cool.
Send. Goes to that national office, gets translated, goes to the field director. Field director delivers it to the child.
How awesome!
And, so it's a great bridge of involving your children with that child or whatever the case may be, depending on that situation. So. Yeah.
Well, if some of our listeners have had their heart stirred by this and they would love to be involved in helping to release a child from poverty in Jesus' name,
yes.
How would they get connected?
It's very simple. Just go to www.compassion.org, and when you pull up the website, you'll have that opportunity. You can actually put in a birth date if you want to sort that way, or you can put in a particular country or particular region and sponsor a child.
Well, you have inspired me, David, in sharing this message of Compassion International further, and I'm going to get involved at a level I haven't before. So This has been so inspiring for me, and thank you so much for sharing your heart and this message while here at Catalyst.
Thank you, Dr. Carroll. Appreciate the time.
God bless you and all you're doing. We'll make sure that the link to Compassion is in the show notes for this episode.
That's great.
Thank you so much.
All right. God bless you.
That conversation really did something in my heart. After I heard more about what Compassion International is doing and how you and I can get involved, it really pulled on something in my heart. I've given to various organizations, but I had never sponsored a child. So after talking with David and hearing about this, I took an action that I have not done before. I went on compassion.com. Right when you first get to compassion.com, you can put in a date. Search for a child with a birth date for a date that's meaningful to you. I put in my birth date, and up came 20-some children who need a sponsor with a birth date the same as mine. Now, I looked through those children, and I chose a little girl, Luce Esther, from Colombia, who has been waiting for many months for a sponsor. She has the same birth date as me. She's 6 years old. Luce has not started going to school yet, just because of the circumstances in her life. I was able to find out some things about her home, her family, her community, and it just really touched my heart. And I became a sponsor for Luce through compassion.com. I hope that this information has encouraged you to perhaps take a step that you haven't before. Maybe you've been aware of Compassion International, but have never actually sponsored a child. If you're a parent, this is a great opportunity to get your children involved in reaching out and ministering to other children. Maybe choose a child to sponsor with the same birth date as your child. Maybe if you are in a small group, a Bible study group, or another group at your church, your group can sponsor a child or a couple children from the same community. Rescuing a child from poverty in Jesus' name. I can't think of a better way to be the hands and feet of Jesus than to give practical and personal help, one-on-one from you or your family, to a specific child with a picture, a name, a family, a community. And again, that help goes through a local church in that child's community. So I would ask you to consider doing that today. Thank you so much for being a part of our podcast family. If you have a question or comment about this or any episode, you can send me a message on drcarolministries.com on our contact page. And until next time, may God richly bless you.